I didn't cry, I didn't even blink. Exactly 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I ran into my ex-husband at my daughter's pediatric dentist office in Charlotte, of all places. He stood in the waiting room grinning down at me, while my younger sister stood beside him, bouncing his new baby girl on her hip like a trophy. He looked me dead in the eye and told me leaving me was the smartest decision he'd ever made, because a woman who can't carry a pregnancy past 12 weeks isn't really a woman at all. I smiled, checked the time on my phone, and waited for the exact moment his entire fake life came apart at the seams. 90 seconds later, the door chimed, and my sister dropped the diaper bag she was holding straight onto the floor. Before I get into it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from today. And if you've ever had someone underestimate you because you stayed calm instead of screaming, hit that like button. It was a humid Tuesday morning in Charlotte, the kind where your shirt sticks to your back the second you step outside. I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Alvarez's pediatric dental office, holding my 8-year-old son's insurance card and a stack of paperwork, because his second molar had cracked on a piece of hard candy and I needed to get him seen before the appointment slot closed. I work as a senior claims investigator for one of the largest property and casualty insurers in the Southeast. My entire job is finding the lie buried inside a stack of paperwork that looks perfectly clean. I've spent 12 years training myself to read a room without reacting to it. That training was about to get tested in the worst possible place. I looked up from the clipboard and felt the air shift before I even saw him. Standing in the doorway blocking the entrance like he owned the building was Russ. No, not Russ. My ex-husband, Holt. He was 38, dressed in a fitted gray quarter zip that cost more than my car payment, with that same smug half-smile he used to wear right before he said something cruel and called it honesty. And right beside him, holding a baby girl in a designer carrier, was my own sister. She'd been my best friend since we were kids sharing a bunk bed. Until 2 years ago, when she started helping out while I was working long hours during the divorce, and somewhere along the way, helping out turned into something else entirely. The baby was maybe 4 months old, dressed in a tiny monogrammed onesie, fast asleep against my sister's chest. The audacity of it landed like a slap. I tried to step around them toward the check-in desk, but Holt shifted his body to block me, clearly wanting an audience. The waiting room was full, 2 other moms, a toddler watching cartoons on the wall-mounted TV, the receptionist behind the glass. He didn't care, he wanted witnesses. Well, he said, loud enough that the toddler's mother looked up from her magazine. If it isn't my poor, broken ex-wife. What are you doing here, sweetheart? Don't tell me you finally had a kid of your own. I looked at him without my pulse moving an inch. I'm here for my son's dental appointment, I said, flat and even. Step aside, Holt. I don't have time for this. But he wasn't going anywhere. He'd spent 10 years of our marriage trying to make me feel small to cover up the fact that he never made partner at his firm, never closed the deals he bragged about at dinner parties, never actually was the man he performed at cocktail hours. He puffed his chest out and pointed a finger in my face. You always thought you were better than me, he sneered, leaning in so the people in the plastic chairs could hear every word. 3 miscarriages in 5 years and you still acted like the problem was me. You made me feel like garbage for wanting a family. But guess what? I have one now. A real one. Leaving you was the best decision of my life. I finally have a woman whose body actually works. My sister chimed in right on cue, adjusting the baby on her hip, letting the overhead lights catch the new diamond on her finger. Oh, leave her alone, Holt, she cooed, voice dripping with fake pity. It must be so hard for her, seeing us happy. You know, I do feel sorry for you. You spent so much time chasing those big insurance cases, you couldn't even keep your own husband satisfied. You're going to be alone in that little condo forever while we're out here building something real. She stroked the baby's wispy hair and looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She just started sleeping through the night. Holt is such a natural father. He's already talking about putting an offer on a place out in Ballantyne, 5 bedrooms, just so she'll have a yard to grow up in. Something you could never give him because your body keeps failing. People were openly staring now. One woman gave me a look of pure pity. An older man shook his head slowly. They expected me to crumble, to drop my paperwork and run out crying, to confirm every cruel thing they'd just said about me in front of strangers. But I am a senior claims investigator. I don't deal in feelings in the field. I deal in documentation, in timestamps, in numbers that don't lie even when people do. I didn't cry, I didn't raise my voice. I looked at Holt's smug face, then at my sister's new ring and let out a small, genuine laugh. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. 9:47 a.m. Really, Holt? I said, voice calm, almost gentle. You think leaving me was the best decision you ever made? His smile faltered for half a second. He wasn't used to me not flinching. Yes, he barked, trying to regain his footing. You're nothing but a bitter, broken woman, Maren. I smiled and took one small step closer, completely unbothered. Let's see if you still feel that way in about 90 seconds, I said. Because the real picture of your perfect new family is about to walk right through that front door. He let out a dismissive scoff and glanced at the entrance. Sure, I was bluffing. He needed to see me break before that door ever opened. He leaned down so his voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. You've always been delusional, he hissed, standing there checking your watch, like you still matter. You have nothing, you're a biological dead end. I spent 10 years pretending I was okay with you failing at the one thing a wife is supposed to do. I was disgusted by you the entire time. Why would a man like me waste his best years tied to a woman whose body can't do the one job it's built for? My sister rested her chin on the baby's head and smirked. No shame at all for what she'd done to a decade of sisterhood. Holt wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her in to complete the picture he wanted me to see. You thought you were so smart with that divorce attorney, he continued, voice low and gloating. You thought you cornered me on the settlement. You really believe I walked away with just my base salary from the firm? He let out a quiet, ugly laugh. I played your overpriced lawyer for a fool. You think a senior associate just takes home what's on the W-2? I moved money before I ever filed those papers, cash gold an account you'll never find. I hid almost $200,000 before our settlement was finalized, right under your nose, while you were too busy crying over negative pregnancy tests to notice your own husband cleaning you out. The insults about my body evaporated the second those words left his mouth. My emotional processing shut off and the cold, clinical machinery of my job switched on instead. He thought he was delivering the killing blow to a heartbroken ex-wife. Instead, he just handed me a verbal confession to financial fraud. My mind started cross-referencing immediately. Every disclosure form he'd signed under oath during our divorce, every line where he swore his total compensation was capped, no outside accounts, no hidden assets. $200,000 doesn't disappear from a senior associate's salary without somebody helping it disappear. You really shouldn't have told me that, I said quietly, and for the first time, something flickered across his face that almost looked like fear. He waved it off, certain there was no proof, certain he was untouchable, certain I had nothing. He had no idea what was about to walk through that door. The front door chimed, sharp and bright, over the low hum of the waiting room TV. Holt didn't turn around right away, too busy watching my face for the breakdown he was sure was coming. But the air in the room changed, and even the toddler stopped watching cartoons to look toward the entrance. Walking in was my brother-in-law Desmond. He was married to my younger sister Iris, not the sister standing in front of me, and at 6'3", with the build of someone who used to play college ball, he had a presence that made rooms go quiet. Desmond wasn't just family. He was a senior fraud investigator for the state attorney general's office, specializing in financial crimes. He had the kind of stare that made guilty men start sweating before he even said a word. Beside him, in lockstep, was a man named Foster. If Desmond represented the cold weight of the law, Foster represented something far more dangerous, the kind of money that doesn't answer to anyone. Foster ran a private equity fund out of Charlotte, the kind of fund that handled portfolios for people who didn't like their names in the news. He was also, as it turned out, one of Holt's firm's biggest clients, someone Holt had spent 3 years sucking up to, bragging constantly about how he personally managed Foster's family trust. Foster's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working from across the room. He wasn't looking at Holt at all. His eyes were locked on my sister and the sleeping baby in her arms. The sound of their footsteps finally made Holt turn. The smirk dropped off his face the second he registered who was standing there. His entire posture changed. The cruel, gloating ex-husband instantly became a desperate employee caught off guard by the one client he couldn't afford to upset. Foster, he stammered, shoving past my sister to extend a hand. What a surprise! If you needed anything on the trust, you could have just called my cell. I'd have come straight to the office. Foster ignored the hand completely. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, vibrating with quiet fury, staring past Holt's shoulder at my sister. Her reaction told the whole story before anyone said anything. The color drained out of her face. Her eyes darted between Foster and the thick envelope tucked under Desmond's arm. She knew exactly why they were here. Holt looked between them, confused, trying to understand why a state fraud investigator and his biggest client were standing in a children's dental office together. He opened his mouth to ask, but Desmond didn't give him the chance. Desmond closed the distance, stepped into Holt's space, and pressed the envelope flat against his chest hard enough to make him stumble back a step. "What the hell is this?" Holt demanded, voice cracking with panic as his hands flew up to catch it. "That's a subpoena," Desmond said, his voice carrying through the small waiting room with total authority. "Open it. The next 60 seconds are going to change the rest of your life." Behind him, my sister's composure finally cracked completely. Her hands started shaking and the diaper bag slipped right out of her grip, hitting the tile floor with a loud thud, scattering wipes and a bottle across the room. The baby startled awake and began to cry. Holt tore open the envelope with trembling hands, scanning the first page, his face going pale as he tried to process it. "What is this garbage?" he said, voice rising. "This is some forged nonsense Maren cooked up because she's jealous." Desmond snatched the papers back out of his hands. "Since you're struggling to read under pressure, let me translate for the room." He flipped to the second page and held it up. "2 months ago, your firm required an executive physical for an updated life insurance policy. Your blood work was flagged for a secondary review. Your cardiovascular health is fine, Holt. Your reproductive function is not. You have a condition called azoospermia. You don't produce viable sperm, you never have. You are and have always been completely sterile." The room went dead silent. A nurse stopped in the hallway. The other mothers stopped pretending not to listen. "No!" Holt whispered, shaking his head. "That's a lie, that's impossible. Look at her." He pointed at the baby. "She's mine. We conceived her, naturally." Foster stepped forward then and for the first time looked directly at my sister. "Tell him," he said, voice low and lethal. "Tell your boyfriend exactly whose blood is in that baby." My sister sobbed, unable to speak, clutching the screaming infant tighter. "She slept with me for 5 months, Foster said, ignoring Holt's begging. "Got pregnant, figured out she could play both sides. Put your name on the birth certificate to lock down the house in Ballantyne and the ring." Then she came to me privately with a paternity test, demanding $15,000 a month to keep my name off the record. "She used you for the real estate. She used me for the money." Holt's face went through every stage of devastation in under 5 seconds. A scream tore out of him, not sadness, pure rage, and he lunged at Foster with a wild swing. Foster sidestepped it easily and drove a punch into his ribs that knocked the wind out of him. They crashed into the waiting room chairs before 2 security guards from the building's front desk came running and pulled them apart, dragging Holt to the floor while he screamed obscenities at everyone in the room. I stood exactly where I'd been the whole time, my son's paperwork still in my hand, watching my ex-husband get pinned to the floor of a children's dental office, his perfect new life dissolving in real time. And the part that satisfied me most was knowing my actual revenge hadn't even started yet. The front door chimed again. This time it was Holt's mother, Vivienne, dressed in a cream St. John suit carrying a gift bag from a baby boutique on Park Road. She'd come for what she thought was a routine well-baby visit for her granddaughter. Instead, she walked into a war zone, broken chairs, a screaming baby, her son pinned to the floor, formula and wipes scattered everywhere. It took her exactly 3 seconds to process it before her eyes locked onto me. "What did you do, Maren?" she screamed, marching past the security guard's finger pointed at my face. "You orchestrated this, didn't you? You couldn't stand seeing him happy, so you hired these people to attack him." "I didn't hire anyone," I said, calm and even. "Your son assaulted that man. They're restraining him." She turned her venom on Desmond next, looking him up and down with open disdain, completely ignoring the gold badge clipped to his belt. "And you, I knew Iris married beneath her. You think you can walk in here with fake paperwork and convince anyone my son is defective? He comes from good people, she's the broken one, she's jealous because her body never worked right." Desmond didn't flinch. "It's a federal medical lab report, Vivienne. Your son is sterile. The baby isn't his. Take it up with the lab if you have a problem with biology." "Please," Vivienne shrieked, stomping her designer heel against the tile like a child. "All of it lies fabricated by a bitter woman with nothing left to live for." She rushed to my sister's side, wrapping her arms protectively around her. "Don't listen to them, sweetheart. We know the truth. Look at her. She has Holt's eyes. She's my granddaughter. Nobody is taking her from us." Foster let out a dark laugh. "You're just as delusional as your son." Ask her about the $15,000 a month she's been collecting from me to keep my name off that birth certificate. Vivienne clamped her hands over her ears. I won't listen to this. You're all liars trying to destroy what my son built. The security guard finally pulled Holt to his feet. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with sweat, and he looked at his mother with wide, desperate eyes. Mom, he gasped. Tell them it's not true. She rushed to him, cupping his face. Of course it's not true, baby. You're perfect. You've always been perfect. Maren is a jealous, broke claims adjuster trying to drag you down to her level because she's nothing without you. She turned back to me, chin lifted, eyes burning. You think you've won, Maren? You think this little scene is going to break us? You have no idea what kind of power my son actually has. I said nothing. I just let her keep talking, because nothing in this world is more dangerous than a proud woman who doesn't know when to stop. She squared her shoulders, drew in a breath, and unleashed the words that would end her son's life as he knew it. You think you cornered him in that mediation? She sneered. You actually believed he walked away with nothing but his base pay. He's a financial genius. He played you and that overpriced lawyer for absolute fools. He pulled almost $200,000 out of client escrow accounts before your divorce was even finalized and moved it into a private account under Ha's cousin's name in Myrtle Beach. $200,000, Maren, clean cash. While you cried over miscarriages, he was busy securing his real future. You lost everything, snapped up, all the color draining from his face. Mom, he choked out. Mom, stop! Don't say another word. But it was already out. The silence that followed was absolute. Client escrow accounts, not his money, his client's money. A senior associate at a real estate closing firm doesn't have $200,000 in personal savings. He had $200,000 because he stole it. My investigator brain started running the math instantly. Holt worked closings. He had signing authority on escrow disbursements for property sales. If money had gone missing from client accounts around the time of our divorce, there would be a paper trail buried in title transfer records, in disbursement logs, in bank wires that wouldn't match the closing statements. Thank you, Vivienne, I said, my voice perfectly polite. I've spent 6 months trying to figure out where that money went. You just saved my forensic team a lot of work. I turned to Holt, whose knees were visibly buckling. Lying on a divorce disclosure carries fines and possible jail time, I said clearly, loud enough for the guards to hear as witnesses. But embezzling client escrow funds is wire fraud and carries a mandatory minimum sentence. Congratulations, Holt. Your mother just handed the state a confession in a room full of witnesses. Vivienne let out a strangled sound and grabbed the wall for support. Her golden boy wasn't just sterile and cheated on. He was a thief, and she'd just handed the keys to his prison cell directly to the people who'd put him there. Foster didn't wait around for any of it. He turned his attention to my sister, who was sobbing on the floor, baby clutched to her chest. You really thought you were the smartest person in the room? He said quietly. You thought you could sleep in my house, take my money, and parade my daughter around as Holt's trophy? I was protecting her, my sister begged. Holt is stable. I needed the house. You don't love anyone but yourself, Foster said. He pulled out his phone, tapped it twice, and held up the screen. As of 10 minutes ago, the account I set up for your monthly payments is drained and closed. The cards are deactivated. You have zero access to my money, and you are never using my daughter as leverage again. My lawyers filed an emergency custody petition the moment the lab results came back this morning. A judge is going to grant me full custody before the end of the week. No, my sister screamed, clutching the baby tighter. She's mine, you can't take her. She's not a paycheck, Foster said, and walked away, leaving her collapsed against the wall. The fight that followed between Holt and my sister was uglier than anything I'd ever witnessed. Him screaming that she'd used him, her screaming back that he was a broken, sterile thief who could never give her a real family. Security had to physically separate them again. Vivienne stood frozen against the wall, watching her perfect family devour itself, the illusion of their superiority completely incinerated. I picked up my son's paperwork, gave Desmond a small nod, and walked out the front door without looking back. The drive home was quiet. My son, who'd been seen by the hygienist during the chaos and was now sitting in the back seat with a temporary crown and a goodie bag, fell asleep against the window before we even left the parking lot. I'd briefed Desmond on everything I suspected weeks ago, the moment I'd first noticed inconsistencies in Holt's old financial disclosures while doing a completely unrelated background check for a fraud case at work. That night, after my son was asleep, Desmond came over and we sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open between us. I am not a forensic accountant by trade, but 12 years investigating insurance fraud teaches you how to read financial records the way other people read a grocery list. I pulled up my notes. We have a verbal confession and a $200,000 starting point, I said. Vivienne said escrow accounts. Holt doesn't have the access to move that kind of money without help. Somebody had to be the clean local vehicle. Desmond leaned forward. He's a senior associate at a real estate closing firm. He has signing authority on disbursements for clients who don't watch their statements closely. But moving that volume of cash domestically without flagging compliance, he'd need somewhere to park it that looks legitimate. I typed my sister's name into the North Carolina real estate licensing database. It came back instantly. She'd gotten her real estate license 18 months ago, right around the time my marriage started falling apart. Before that, she'd worked as a part-time hostess, making barely $20,000 a year. Now she was driving a leased Mercedes and selling $500,000 listings. Let's look at my sister, I said, pulling up county property records tied to her license number. Dozens of transactions populated the screen, way too many for someone that knew in the business. I scanned the buyer and seller names. None of them were real families, they were all LLCs. Crestline Holdings, Desmond read aloud. Magnolia Ridge Partners, Bellwood Equity Group, all registered to the same agent address in Wilmington. It's a shell network. We cross-referenced the dates of her phantom property flips against the timeline of Holt's divorce disclosures, and the picture assembled itself with sickening clarity. Holt moved stolen escrow funds into accounts controlled by my sister's brokerage. She ran fake property sales between the shell companies, inflating values each time, washing the stolen money clean as legitimate real estate gains, then funneling the laundered cash into the account in his cousin's name. They built a whole laundering pipeline, Desmond said, sitting back, arms crossed. He stole the money, she cleaned it. This isn't a divorce dispute anymore. This is wire fraud and money laundering across state lines, since the shell registrations are in Delaware. That's federal jurisdiction now. I printed everything. The trap was built. All we needed was for Holt to panic and make a mistake. It didn't take long. Less than 2 hours later, my banking app flagged unauthorized activity. An attempted freeze on my checking account, initiated through a backdoor access token Holt had quietly kept active on a shared account portal from our marriage, one I discovered months ago and deliberately left untouched, just in case. My phone rang, his name on the screen. I let it freeze fully, watching the request route itself through a verification handshake with my bank's federal server, which meant his exact IP address, his work terminal, got permanently logged on the other end. Then I answered and put it on speaker. "You think you're so smart," Holt snarled the second the line connected, voice shaking with panic dressed up as aggression. "I just locked your accounts. You can't even buy groceries right now, let alone hire a lawyer to come after anything." I said nothing. Silence is the most effective interrogation tool there is. "You humiliated me today," he kept going, filling the void exactly like I expected. "You're going to sign an NDA. My attorney's drafting it right now. You agree to never speak to the state, the bar, or anyone else about my finances, or I will leave you completely broke. I'll make sure you can't work in insurance again in this state. And if I refuse?" I asked, voice flat. "Then I drain everything you have left and ruin your career," he said. "Sign it, or I destroy your whole life." That single sentence was a recorded explicit extortion threat. I had everything I needed. "We understand each other perfectly," I said, and hung up. 2 minutes later, he called back, sounding like a different person entirely. Panicked, sobbing, offering me first $10,000, then $50,000, then $100,000 in cash to delete the trace on his IP address and walk away. I recorded every word. His firm was hosting their annual client appreciation gala the following night at a ballroom downtown. He would be standing in a room full of his bosses, his colleagues, and Foster, his biggest client. I was going to walk through those doors and make sure every single one of them knew exactly who he really was. The ballroom was full of crystal chandeliers and string lights when I arrived the next evening in a deep emerald dress, a small clutch in hand holding my tablet. The room quieted as I walked in. Holt spotted me from across the floor and his champagne glass tipped, splashing down the sleeve of his tux. He stormed over, 2 security guards flanking him on instinct. "What are you doing here?" he hissed. "You're not on the list." "Get her out," he barked at the guards. Before they could lay a hand on me, a voice cut through the room. "Stand down. Don't touch her." The firm's managing partner, a sharp older man named Whitfield, stepped through the crowd. "She's not crashing anything, Holt. She's my guest." He turned to me with a respectful nod. "Our compliance team flagged a breach from your terminal this morning," he told Holt. "I needed an independent forensic review, so I brought in the best. Maren isn't just your ex-wife. As of 6 a.m. today, she's the lead independent investigator hired to audit this entire firm's escrow practices with my full authorization." Holt's face went the color of ash. Upstairs in the firm's glass conference room, with 2 armed guards stationed by the door, I laid it all out for Whitfield on the projection screen. The escrow withdrawals, the shell company network, the laundered transfers, the IP trace linking every single transaction back to Holt's terminal, and finally, the audio recording of his bribery attempt, his own voice offering me $100,000 to make it disappear. Holt didn't even bother denying it by the end. He just put his head down on the table. Whitfield stood. "You're terminated, effective immediately. And I'm filing a civil suit against you personally for institutional damages." He nodded toward the door. It opened, and Desmond walked in with 4 agents from the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. Holt was read his rights and handcuffed right there at the conference table, then walked, in front of the entire gala downstairs, through the ballroom in cuffs while 200 of the firm's wealthiest clients watched in stunned silence. Cameras from the local business journal caught every second of it. 3 months later, I sat in family court in a tailored navy suit, while Holt was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit and ankle chains, gaunt and hollow-eyed after months in county holding. My sister sat at a separate table in a faded dress, having lost her real estate license, her Mercedes, and her freedom of movement pending trial. Foster sat with his attorneys, calm and unbothered, having already secured emergency custody of his daughter. The judge ruled quickly. DNA confirmed Foster was the biological father. My sister was stripped of parental rights pending the outcome of her own federal charges. Then the judge turned to the matter of my original divorce settlement. Because the respondent committed fraud upon this court by concealing assets during the original proceeding, the judge said, "That settlement is voided. This court awards the petitioner full recovery of the $200,000 in question, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages from all remaining sizable assets." Holt's face crumbled. He had nothing left. Outside the courthouse, Vivian was waiting, no longer in St. John, wearing a wrinkled cardigan, asking me for a loan to hire her son a real attorney. I told her the same words Holt once used on me, that walking away was the best decision I'd ever made, and I left her standing on the courthouse steps. A year later, I stood on a rooftop patio overlooking the Charlotte skyline with my son, now 9, and my sister Iris and her husband Desmond beside me. I'd taken what the court awarded me and built my own firm, specializing in financial fraud investigations for women going through contested divorces. My calendar is booked 8 months out. Holt is serving time at a federal facility in Butner. My other sister took a plea deal to avoid trial and now works retail in a strip mall, completely alone, completely broke, with no claim to the daughter she tried to use as currency. I raised my glass to the skyline and thought about every time someone told me my worth was tied to what my body could or couldn't do. They were wrong. My worth was never about that. It was about staying steady when everyone around me lost their mind, and letting the truth do exactly what it always does when you give it enough room: burn everything false to the ground.